if we're really, really quiet, we might be able to get through this video because I've got one of the kids asleep, the other one busy watching Clarissa Explains It All or H2O or something, I don't know which, and the other one is watching Jake and the Neverland Pirates, so we're good. We've got the busyness is good. We are in the book of Esther today. Real quick, I'm going to remind you, one thing about Nehemiah that I forgot to mention was when Ezra was reading the word to the people, it says that he was explaining it to them as well. He wasn't simply just reading the scripture, he was explaining it, he was exegeting it, expository, like preaching through the word, verse by verse, the law, explaining to the people what these laws meant, explaining to them what the words meant, which is what's so important about Bible study for us, personally or me, individually, is that we can help understand it better so that we can help other people understand it better. Any reason why you get into any kind of text or information or learning something is so that you can help other people to learn it as well. I mean, that's the overall goal. The hope is that you learn information so that you can help other people understand things too. We're in the book of Esther, which actually takes place before Nehemiah and Ezra, historically in about 483 to 473 BC. The book of Esther came in around the king Xerxes Ahasuerus. He was a very evil king in the sense that he had a very short temper, which you see in the Bible very, very easily in the book of Esther. Only two books, Ruth and Esther, are the ones that the girls always go look into because their names. But you see him in history. There's historical references that refer to him being very short-tempered. One time he had his men building a bridge, and the bridge collapsed, so he went ahead and beheaded the soldiers that were building the bridge because he was mad at them. And other things like that. You kind of see where Esther might have been a little bit concerned about going before him, especially unsummoned, because there's certain things in the days of Persia when that a law written by the king could not be changed. It couldn't be broken. You could add a new law to counteract it, which is what ends up happening in the book of Esther, but you couldn't change a law that's enacted, which is why when the servants go, you need, because his wife, Queen Vashti, decides that she's going to stand up to him, and he throws her out, and then makes an edict, and the servants are like, well, what do you do now? You can't break that. And when Haman comes to the king and says, there's these Jews, and they're a lot of trouble, and they're going to cause trouble for you, we need to get rid of them, and the king, of course, is short to make a bad mistake, a bad decision there. But let's just jump into Esther chapter 1 real quick. It's where Queen Vashti gets banished. The king is throwing a banquet with all the princes and attendants, the army officers, the nobles and princes, a banquet that lasted about 180 days. And this was like a serious feast. And of course, she had a feast too. The queen had her own feasting time. The women of the palace had their own place to feast. Typically, I'm not going to get too much of that. Basically, he summons the queen and she refuses to come. Then there's a royal edict, of course, that can't be changed. The servants are like, the men of the household, if they see what you do with your wife, if you forgive her for this kind of thing, all the men in the kingdom are gonna see that, or all the women in the kingdom are gonna think they can stand up to their husbands like that. It's interesting how it funnels through even there. The model of the king, or the presidency, or the king in Cushan, modeled down to the people. They could see what was going on. And it's okay if so-and-so does it, so I must be able to. You see how the standard is higher for the authorities, the royalty. And of course, he did miss her when she was gone. And chapter 2 is where Queen Esther basically saves the king from certain death because there's an attempt of assassination on him. Queen Esther, whose real name is Hadassah, Jewish name, her name in Persia is Esther because she doesn't want everyone to know she's a Jew because they're out to get the Jews right now in this period of time. They're not really sympathetic. Mordecai is already working in the castle, or in the palace, and he is Esther's cousin. And he basically has adopted Esther. And there's a really good movie, there's a couple good movies, a couple good books based off of this story, and I'm really quite honestly, I don't know why there wouldn't be, because it's such a good story. It's so dramatic, and it's a great picture. It almost didn't even make it into the Bible. The book of Esther almost did not make it into the Bible because it doesn't talk about God. It didn't have God's name in it anywhere. So, Martin Luther almost just didn't let it in there, but they ended up deciding it should be. And Esther herself, her name, Hadassah, means something hidden, which is interesting. Makes you wonder what else is in this story. And I think it's really how, even though the people were in exile, God was looking out for them. Even now, while the people were banished in Persia, God was looking out for them. This was before Nehemiah, before Ezra, before the people started making it headway back home. So Esther shows her Jewishness. Yeah. Well, actually, it's not before, because the temple had already been restored and finished, and the work had been resumed. But it was before the walls of Israel, of Jerusalem, so I should correct myself there. It's before Ezra and Nehemiah. Well, it's actually before Nehemiah, after Ezra. Okay, so it's actually Ezra, Esther, Nehemiah. That's the order chronologically, not how it is in the Bible, but chronologically. When we speak to that basically Esther is told by Mordecai to not tell the king that you're a Jew. And then Esther throws a banquet. Let's see here. In those days, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. There's that assassination attempt at the end of chapter 2 that we just talked about. Let's see here. Verse 21 through 22. In those days, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's officials from those who guarded the door, became angry and sought to lay hands on the king. But the plot became known to Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. Now, when the plot was investigated to be found out to be true, they were both hanged on the gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles of the King's Presence, which, of course, is a book that we don't have access to. And there in verse 22 is a hint of God right there. If you think, how did Mordecai become aware of the plot? It was because Mordecai was a man of prayer. Because he prayed, and God told him about this plot. It wasn't that he just overheard something, but it hints to God spoke it to Mordecai. It doesn't say that directly, but Mordecai was a man of prayer. He was a Jew, and he did have faith in God. And it says there that the king wrote it down in the Chronicles, which is interesting, and that's important because that comes up later. In chapter 3, Haman becomes the new second in command to the king, and he says, he doesn't like the Jews at all. He rages against Mordecai and all the Jews, and is a threat to the nation. And let's see. And of course, he convinces the king to make an edict against all the Jews. In verse 15 of chapter 3, it says, the couriers went out and upheld the king's command that we're going to, annihilate all the Jews. And we should destroy them all because they're dangerous, right? We, put this lie out, put this rumor out that they're all dangerous. And then Satan loves confusion. He hates mankind and all the Jews. And all of the city of Susa was in confusion at that time. Then in mourning, Esther basically is called out by Mordecai and says, Esther, you're where you are as the new queen to stop Haman, to save your people. And he says, if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. But you know this, whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Wayne Watson has a great song, by the way, for such a time as this. You should look it up. It's a very good song. And it may not be his original song though. He does sing it on one of his CDs that I've got. Go and assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. And Esther says, I will go into the king's presence. If I perish, I perish. She was willing to put her life down on the line for the king, because she was going to go into the king's presence without being summoned. And that could mean death for her, but she was willing to lay down her life for her people, for her family. And we'll touch on the rest of the book of Esther in the next video. But the main points with Esther here is just whatever God is calling you to do, you're in a place that's strategic to do the work that only can be done through God's hand in your life right now. You know, He's going to do things without you through other people. The glory, the wonder of it all is that He wants to use us in His plan. He wants to involve us through prayer, through service, to service to the King. You know, me and my wife have gotten into this show, this British show called Downton Abbey on PBS, and we've watched the first few seasons already on Amazon. But it's so good. I love the show. No matter what you think of it necessarily, it just really shows the royalty, the higher ups, you know, the high class people versus the servants and everything like that. The one thing about it I love is that the servants pay attention to their masters so much that, you know, they consider service their calling. You know, their job, their life is serving someone else. And that's how we're supposed to look at it too. And whatever God has called us, we're to serve in the way that He has called us. And we'll continue with the book of Esther and the exciting conclusion of the whole mess there in the next video, my friend.